Okay, now you can tell me.
Okay, so
Are you going to start from the beginning?
We'll start from the beginning, because the interesting thing around churches, you're always making adjustments, and often those adjustments feel emotional, but they're really not emotional adjustments. They are, as I would call it, demographic adjustments. They are marketing adjustments. They are what people can tolerate, what their economic adjustments. And there's a wonderful joke I heard earlier today, where the new minister comes to a congregation, and he's given the keys to the minister's house, the parsonage, and he's given the allowance to care for the building. And that's his responsibility. At the end of the year, they do a review, of course, and he shows what he's paid, and he's been paying the neighbor boy to mow the lawn. And the elders of the council say, well, Reverend, we're spending quite a bit of money here on the neighbor boy mowing the lawn at the parsonage. The former minister mowed his own lawn.
Okay.
And the minister's response to the council is, well, I asked him, but he said he didn't want to mow it anymore.
Okay, now I get it.
Right. In other words, yes, I would love to do things the way that they've always been done.
Yes.
But you also have to understand, as a congregation, as human beings, that there's going to be adjustments.
Yeah. Didn't you tell me a real world story about someone's housing?
Trying to remember. Oh, there's many stories of housing. Yeah. But
something about, it turns out that being provided, when you're a minister, being provided a home isn't always the best thing for you.
No. Well, yeah, in the United Church, that's my story in the United Church. I had lived probably, I was 40 something, 45, I think I was, before I bought a house. And prior to that, you were living in church-provided housing. That is to say, part of the job was that you had a house to live in, which sounds a great advantage, but it's no advantage when it comes to equity in your life. Because one of the things people do, most people don't really save very much. Most people don't work. They don't have $1 million in a bank account somewhere, or even $500,000. Like that's my experience of life, is that that's relatively rare.
Yes.
That people actually pull that off. But what can happen to schmucks like myself, who aren't very good at that sort of thing, is you buy a house and you live in it, and you wake up one day and it's worth more than you paid for it.
Yeah.
And that is an investment of a sort, and it works. Only problem is, to move out is inconvenient.
Yes.
And take the money. So, but at least you sort of have this equity in a house that, therefore, when I didn't own a home, I was paying, 10, 11, 12% interest on everything you did. You were paying credit card interest. And then all of a sudden you own a house, and the bank looks at you very differently, because they can take your house out from under you. And so therefore you're paying half those percentage of interest rates. Whatever the going rate might be, you're paying half of it, because you're doing it through your home equity, or whatever you might call it. So it's an interesting, it's not an advantage to be provided housing. I suppose it is all the way, if you can go all the way from cradle to grave.
Of course.
Then that might work for you. But the problem with ministers is that when the day you retire, you're set out into the housing market when it's at whatever peak it's at.
That's the wrong time to be.
It's the wrong, when you turn 65 and your income goes down because you are now on pension, that's the wrong time to find out what real estate is worth.
So for all of the aspiring clerics and rabbis and priests and ministers and pastors, would it be safe to say that your advice is take the stipend?
Well, now I think it's rare. Actually, it's very rare for congregations to offer housing. And in some ways, I actually think that it would be an advantage to go back to that, in the sense that most young people,
expense of...
Well, yeah, because of the expense of now entering the housing market is astronomical.
Yes.
And in some ways, and it's again what you say, our conversation in part will be about grace. And part of the grace is, so I had this, interesting experience where I lived in a manse, and that's what you did, and it was fine and dandy. And what it did is it kept me out of a housing market that was absolutely ridiculous at that time. Because I remember people being upside down in their mortgages. I remember people paying, they were paying interest-only mortgages. And the housing market was flip-flopping, and one day the house was worth $120,000, the next day it was worth $80,000.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. So, and I avoided all of that. Didn't lose my shirt, didn't gain anything, but didn't lose anything either. And then when I finally did buy a house, it was during that 2004 blip on the radar, when housing was, I mean, I bought my house for $115,000 and there was no down payment required. I had to pay that closing cost, but it was
Yes.
a no down payment mortgage, which, and it was called a high ratio mortgage at the time, but they basically allowed me to buy a house based on the fact that I paid my bills, if that makes sense. And they told me, here, you have to give us your Visa card because you can't have one of those anymore.
That whole thing is interesting to me. So much of our world is ruined by this belief that the past is a reliable indicator of the future. The thing that really...
Good luck with that.
What?
Good luck with that.
Well, but the thing that I don't understand and don't like about the way that credit is evaluated is you've done great in the past,
so you'll do well in the future.
But there's no algorithm for determining termination, disability.
No.
And so it seems to me that it doesn't even seem like a good deal it actually doesn't seem to me like it's a good deal for the banks. Like something has to be done in that area.
The banks seem to be doing all right, at least in Canada. They're highly regulated and they seem to do quite well in the sense that they're always highly, highly profitable. And the Royal Bank of Canada is it's one of the most powerful companies on earth. Well, if that makes sense.
Well, I have a lot of problems with banks. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. When I was growing up, actually, I remember going to get my first loan, and the first thing that they would ask you when you went to get a loan back in what it would have been, I think I was maybe in college. And I think it was a student loan that I was trying to get. And the first thing they would ask you is, what's your father's name? We need his name and his social insurance number.
Okay.
Because if his credit was crap, they weren't going to touch you.
Wow.
And they didn't care about your mother, they cared about your father. That was the deal. And you were usually dealing with the same bankers. Like in those days, a bank manager was a fixture in the community forever. That is to say, if you screwed up banking-wise and the bank manager thought you to be a bad risk,
yes,
he wasn't going anywhere. And you were going to have to find financing. I mean, that's why loan sharking and that sort of thing was so prevalent at one time in the country, because if the banks decided you were a bad risk, and we still have the sort of payday loan thing that is the punishment upon your house if you annoy the banks, which to me is very religious. Annoy the gods, and you will be made to suffer.
3 quick points, and then I want to talk about grace.
Yeah.
The first one is the under-acknowledged benefit of being wealthy.
Oh, yes.
Is that you save so much money.
Right.
When you're poor, you can't buy the economy size.
Nope.
And and you can't invest.
Right.
You make so much money just by being able to pay for things up front. Just an observation.
Yes.
Number 2, I'll still be coming back to Hamilton, but I'm planning to move to New York City as soon as this podcast is generating enough revenue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for apartments online, trying to figure out, do I move close to my mom in New Jersey?
Right.
Do I go next to my best friend in Brooklyn?
Mm-hmm.
Do I live in the neighborhood I always dreamed of living in? Because I like to live in the core,
yes,
in the most obscure part.
Right.
So I'm crunching all of these numbers, and it's cheaper to live in New York City than Toronto right now.
Yes, I wouldn't doubt that.
Because prices in Toronto have gone up, and since COVID, prices in New York have gone down.
Right. That hasn't, Toronto, I think, is in the middle of it, but not yet.
And New York does not have a problem giving people, what are they called? Not licenses, they're called something else.
Building permits.
Yeah. They don't hold up building permits. You can get them really quick. And that's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Third and final observation. I've been thinking about retirement.
Right.
And I think I am thinking about places like Greece and Turkey and Italy
Mhm.
and Malta.
Well, Malta sounds like the right place.
Malta does probably, but here's a different model.
Yeah.
In Italy, especially Sicily,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about those $1 government deals.
Right.
Some of them are wonderful. Some of them aren't. Some of them are the Italian federal government. Some of them are municipal
Right.
or provincial. So there's a whole bunch of $1 programs. But outside of that market, like in good hopping villages, there's no such thing as a mortgage. Don't even ask for one.
Right.
On the other hand, you could live like a prince or a princess for $25,000, and like you never have to carry like it's very similar in Buenos Aires.
Right. Yes.
So,
well, in some places, apparently, you can have servants as well. That's what I've seen on the internet. Like, labor is so cheap that even on your modest pension, you can live quite wisely and well. The thing that reminds me of a little bit, if I can be, because having grown up in a evangelical sort of Mennonite, there were always missionaries, and in many ways, the missionaries lived exactly that kind of life. Because they would go off as Canadians with Canadian money backing them.
Yes.
They would go off to someplace like Africa or the Philippines or someplace like that. And again, labor was just incredibly cheap there. So they would have servants. And of course, they were doing the ministry. So they would have people washing their dishes and cooking their clothes, washing their clothes and tending to them like royalty. And often those folks didn't come back home happily because life was too much of North America, sort of you do your own laundry.
Yes.
Right. Nobody's going to do your laundry for you.
Yes.
And if they do, you're going to pay.
Yes.
Sort of thing. So it's an interesting.
Well,
as a farm boy, it's not attractive to me because I kind of like being somewhere.
Yes.
And having my toes in the dirt.
Yes.
Right.
My mother claims that she was middle class in Malta.
Whatever that might mean.
And this is the most hilarious thing my mother ever said. She said, well, she was talking to me about how career oriented her mother was and how like weird it was at that time.
Yep.
And there was like instability in the home. I don't want to get into it. The whole point is she would always talk about her servant, like her mom's servants.
Yes.
And I was like, you were middle class.
Oh yeah.
And I said, she mentioned playing with her servants' children all the time.
Right.
And I said, well, wait a minute. If servants were taking care of you, who was taking care of the servants' kids?
Right.
And she said, well, obviously the servants have servants.
Of course. Of course.
All right. So let's talk about Will and Grace, Grace and Frankie, the Christian concept of grace. Yes.
When I do the what is you can look forward and you can look backward.
Okay.
Right. And so you sort of, and sometimes you stand sort of facing neither direction and sort of listening with both ears. And to my mind, a great, as I think you spoke of earlier, a great many things in your life that seem to be not positive on the longer term turn out to be not only okay, but quite positive.
Yes.
And in ways that you would never have anticipated that you couldn't manufacture.
Yes.
That that our intelligence, our capacities, whether you talk about intellectual capacity or physical capacity or just what would I call that? The karmic capacity.
Okay. Oh wow, you're invoking karma. That's interesting.
Right. All of that. That none of that you have control of.
Okay.
Right. Not or at least that you don't have the capacity to control. And yet, in spite of all that lack of being able to control these things,
yes,
you do your input.
Yes.
And then you find that in the end, things that looked very dark and miserable turned out better than you imagined.
Okay.
Or didn't. And to a certain extent,
And is that what you're defining grace as?
Well, that's how I see grace. I see grace as this turned out better than it might have.
Okay.
I can think of ways that this could have gone a whole lot worse.
Okay.
And I will say that to people. I said that there was a movie crew in, and they were, they didn't have a big budget, but they were wonderful people. They were doing a great job, and they were doing really difficult work because they were doing a kind of filming that is on the cusp of filming, like it's a immersive sort of thing. And they had been working away, and they had wandered into the stairwells with smoke machines and set off the alarm. And at that particular morning, I had an appointment downtown with a doctor and had left to go to that appointment. I was wrong about the time. And so it was like, well, I'm not going to wait that long. And I headed back to the church to wait out the differential of the time. And when I walked into the door downstairs, the alarm went off. It was the fire alarm, which is problematic because you'll have the hoses guys here before you can say Jiminy Cricket. So I was immediately able to deal with that and call the alarm company saying, no, this is definitely a false alarm. I'm here in the building. There's no question about this. I'm here in the building, and it's a false alarm. And so I hightailed it to where I figured the alarm was going to be found. And then I had to rethink in my brain, oh yes, here's how I get this thing to shut up. And meanwhile, there's about a half dozen or 8 people in the stairwell, absolutely in panic mode, like, oh my God, look at what we've done. Oh, we're in so much trouble.
Yes.
And you could just see in their faces the abject horror and terror because I was on my way.
Right.
Right. And now we're going to get chewed out.
Right.
And my response to them was to say, hey guys, is anybody hurt? No? Great. Then I said, I don't think this is the worst thing that happened in the world today. And nobody got hurt. And to me, that's where grace comes, because I can see handling that a very different way. It's like, what are you people doing? Right? You can just hear the other way. And when you're rearing children, it's the same. And maybe that was my mistake rearing my children, is I tended to take that attitude that whatever this, supposed disaster is, perhaps there are worse disasters in the world. And perhaps what we should look at things is say, where's the possibility of hope and love and grace in this thing?
Okay.
And that's how I have to do my childhood. Because, as a shunned Mennonite, that wasn't so great. And there were many, 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 many days of abject terror and horror and
was anger
pain.
In there too?
Oh, anger, all that kind of good stuff. And if I'd have been foolish,
don't go into that.
Okay.
I want to do a whole Mennonite backstory
but
part.
What I'm talking about grace is grace is that capacity.
Yes.
To both look back and look forward and be okay. And Sunday's sermon was, Peter, do you love me? Right? And Jesus saying, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I love you, Lord. And it's agape, and it's not. And at the end of that is, to me, the most wonderful phrase that I've ever heard. It said, Peter, when you were young, you girded yourself and you went where you wished. And when you were old, someone else will gird you and take you where you do not wish to go. And in both these ways, you will glorify me. And it's this sense that, Peter, as you look forward, you might be looking at some things that aren't so wonderful to look at. And I think all of us, as we age, have some sense of, incapacity, right?
Yes.
Like we're not as, and it depends. For some people, adulthood is when they finally get released from all the things that are miserable for them in their childhood. Other people have a wonderful childhood that they never quite get over.
Yes.
If you hear
I know exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like, why can't it be like that when I was younger? And I hear people speak that way. I used to get
what? That's an example of trauma coming from not having been traumatized enough.
Right, yes. I had that for a certain extent, because when I was first a young minister, you'd have all these guys getting up to give their testimonies about, how they, how many women they'd had and how much debauchery they got into, and then the Lord saved them. And that made them so credible to so many people as the saved, redeemed soul that should lead us.
Now, is that the preferred model by St. Augustine, Luther, or St. Francis? One of those three was really into the idea of just go for it. If you're going to drink, drink a lot. But like once it's time to come to
right. Well, but
God, it's like over.
Yeah, the Mennonites were into that, but
Yeah.
you had a window.
Yeah, but who was that?
I can't even think.
Okay,
right now.
we'll figure that out.
Luther used to say sin boldly, but what he was meaning by that was simply that you're not going to get it figured out as to what's right and wrong. So figure out what you come to the conclusion of what you think is about as good as you can get, and do that, and do it with abandon, and do it completely, because if you wait around until you've figured it out, you'll do nothing.
Yes.
And that won't help you either.
Yes. So your description of grace sounds incredibly similar to something I was not expecting, and not at all similar to how it was described to me from a Catholic perspective.
No, that would be substitutionary atonement.
Okay. What does that mean?
Substitutionary atonement is you're a bad person and somebody else gets to suffer for that.
No, it's not how it was described to me.
Okay.
The way that it was described to me was it's forgiveness or acceptance that's not deserved or earned.
Okay. Yeah, that's the positive side.
It's just given. So there's that. That's very different from what you just described to me. Yeah. But there's this Muslim, there's this gorgeous female Muslim self-help guru. She lives somewhere in the Middle East. I forgot. I'm so embarrassed that I forgot her name. She gives really fantastic advice. She also knows how to contour her makeup perfectly. And someone came to her with a question about, why is my life so miserable? So she asked her a bunch of follow-up questions. And basically what happened was this woman keeps having, not the self-help guru, the person she was counseling, had all of these wonderful opportunities to detach from jobs, people, family members that weren't good for her.
Right.
And instead of being
grateful,
instead of being praise be to Allah for shutting doors and opening new ones, she was trapped in the cycle of please take me back, please take me back. And that, and so the idea that, because I'm not as familiar with Islam as I am with Judaism or Christianity, but the idea that you need that, like when something terrible happens to you, you have to get that it's an opportunity to pivot, which is so delightful to me, actually does sound very similar to what you're just describing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, again, my notions of grace are quite personal. And I think notions of grace or how we practice or receive grace, I guess, is different for different people, because I think life, what unfolds for you in life, determines to a certain extent what grace is to you.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And I think that's okay.
Is grace room to move?
Grace is just...
Is it wiggle room to figure stuff out?
Well, it might be the worst thing on earth. I mean, if it, like, I always like, it's, come on now. He's, Stephen Fry.
Okay.
He writes about the Greek myths. And he writes...
Is that the book you told me about last time?
Okay. Yeah, Stephen Fry. And he's done a trilogy.
What's the name of the book?
Mythos is the one. I mean, he's got a trilogy of Mythos. But he does a wonderful job, I think, as a... Like, he was on the way to being an Anglican priest. So I find his writing to be well-informed theologically. And what he does is he's writing about the Greek mythology and writing in the context of an English Anglican sort of... I mean, he's an atheist, but you understand that he's writing about the gods and and his Christian sensibilities. At least I find that he does a wonderful job of helping a person like myself, who's steeped in Christian mythology, to understand how the Greek mythology and how it all, that it interrelates. And a lot of the Christian mythology was foreshadowed, if nothing else, and it's true of the Egyptians as well. I mean, a lot of what Egyptian mythology found its way through Judaism into Christianity, even the death and resurrection motifs, right? Yeah, all that.
Madonna Child.
Yeah, Madonna Child, all those sorts of things. And the wonderful thing that Stephen Fry describes is Pandora's box. or Pandora's jar, because it's technically a jar. But, Pandora is sent, and this is where I find the Christian myths were kind of trying to be kinder, because in the Greek myths, women were sent to basically make men's lives miserable. And Pandora was sent in order to do that. And the way they did it is to give her a jar of terrible things that they knew she couldn't not undo the lid.
Yes.
Because of, that female curiosity, which is quite sexist as well. Okay. But she takes, and the only thing that she managed to keep in the jar is hope. And Stephen Fry does a wonderful job of saying, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it good to have hope? Or is it just a frustration? Because having hope is so useless in the sense that, it just keeps you going when you should give up. And I think that was the conversation you and I were having. Like, if it isn't working, like it's that Einstein thing. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, that can be what hope and grace are. They can be this really stupid thing where I do awful and terrible things,
yes,
and expect that there's going to be no consequence and there's going to be no trouble about it.
Well,
and that's not grace.
Yes.
Right. That's stupid.
Yes.
Okay. And we don't need more stupid in the world. There's plenty, as Judge,
Yes.
Stupid is forever. And, that isn't grace. It isn't grace when I sort of, wind off and do unspeakable things to myself and to others, and then somehow wind it back that, well, okay, I still have hope, or I still have whatever. To me, grace is a more active verb in the sense that it's the thing you're working toward. It is that sort of Lutheran sin boldly. It's that thing where I'm really trying my best here.
Yes.
And I really know that even trying my very, very best, things are going to get screwed up.
Yes.
And when they do, that's when I can believe, I can embrace the idea of grace, that no matter how badly I've screwed up, there is still hope. And that's a wonderful thing, and it's a terrible thing. Well, I have surgery on Tuesday, and so, and I went and got a haircut. And Lisa said, oh, don't you get 2 weeks off or something? And I said, no. I said, I'll probably get 15 minutes off if I know how things go. It's like, well, why wouldn't you take that opportunity? Like, why wouldn't you take? Well, because it's boring, and B, because it's been my experience. Hey, James.
Hello.
It's been my experience in life that when you're recovering from something like surgery, lying around in a bed for a couple of weeks is not usually helpful. And my wife isn't.
The anesthetic doesn't move out of your system.
No, you need to get up and get going again.
And whether you want to doesn't really matter. You have to.
Well, yeah, you have to push yourself a little bit, and maybe even a lot.
Although I'm going to beg you to please stay in your bed for as long as it takes to make sure your stitches don't rip.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll be good about that.
I don't
have a good history around stitches.
You don't?
No, I don't have a good.
Okay. Perhaps I could loan you my hernia corset.
Yes, I've heard about those. Who knows that they might give.
It's black.
Oh, well.
You can wear it over or under your clothes.
Okay.
And it's a men's one.
Yes. Well, I was going to break out my suspenders because when I had surgery for kidney stones, wearing a belt was not a lot of fun.
Yes.
Right. So I do have I have 2 pairs of lovely suspenders that, what was it? My dear wife, when I put those on, said, this is not going on the long term. You may do this for this period of time, but I'm not going to have a husband in suspenders.
What do you prefer, suspenders because suspenders are having a moment?
I prefer nakedness, but I do put on clothing because it's a concession to other people.
Okay.
And that might be the German blood in me. The Germans are quite famous for their
Germans love nudity.
Yes, for their naturalism. They're not predisposed to clothing.
Yes. Okay. Wrapping up grace.
Yes, wrap up grace.
We need to bring into this the brilliant, charismatic, and insightful Christian theologian Carrie Underwood.
Yeah, go for it.
She has a song called, she's a really good songwriter.
Yep.
I don't know if she wrote the following song by herself, but Jesus take the wheel.
Yeah.
So I don't perceive it in this church, but there's I was reading an essay. I have to get better with bringing in the names of all of these wonderful authors who inform my episodes. But it was a historical analysis of the ways in which Christianity's revolution in kindness, generosity, and generosity have evolved into its worst aspects.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Which is the exact opposite of what most people think, because most people think, if people who don't like Christianity will say stuff like, it's not true, it's nothing but political maneuvering, it's a way to control people, so on and so forth.
Oh, do I get the idea of controlling people? A, it's unattractive, and B, I can't figure out.
Are you saying you wish you could?
No, no. Did I ever tell you that story?
No, but Carrie Underwood.
Okay, Carrie Underwood.
Carrie Underwood.
Jesus, take the wheel.
So with that operating in the background, and you talking about grace, the question or the problem or the thing I'm still trying to figure out about this subject is, when I listen to that song, depending on my mood, sometimes I think it's a woman testifying to the power of just seeing what happens, which sounds like your concept of grace, and allowing some sort of magic or grace or whatever to inform her next step, which she doesn't know how to take in life.
Right.
But then sometimes I listen to it and it reminds me of the churches and the preachers that I don't like at all, which is an abdication of responsibility.
Right. Yes.
And because, the video the very well directed video that accompanies this song, like, it's a very literal interpretation of the song. Like, there's a car accident.
Right.
What do people want to look out for such that they don't misapply the concept of grace as laziness or irresponsibility?
Well, that's it in a nutshell, is that grace, if what grace is somebody else gets to clean up after my mess, that's the ting in your brain to say, well, I mean, and my illustration of that is when I got to the church this morning, there was shit all over one of the toilets, and somebody made a
here.
Yes, there were groups of people in last night, and somebody had shall we say, a bowel movement of biblical proportions, and it was, and it was left. I mean, there was some attempt, which actually makes me a little more nervous, that there was some attempt to clean it up, which means they didn't walk into the kitchen and get the disinfectant and take care of this. They obviously, and to me, it's embarrassment, right? Like, I've screwed up, and look what I've done, and I'm going to half clean that up. And okay.
My brain's not calculating.
Okay.
It.
Well, but what I'm saying, we all take a dump where we didn't mean to.
Yes.
Okay. Sooner or later, it happens in our lives that we take a dump where we didn't mean to. And it is the thing that I learned when I was living with a family. Okay. Now I live alone. And I say this and people get very upset with me, but I say this and I say, yeah, if there's skid marks at my house, I'm the guy that's got to deal with that.
Okay.
Okay. Because nobody is going to come behind me and look after my skid marks.
Right.
If I walk away from that toilet and it's not clean, two things are true.
Yes.
One is nobody's coming to take care of that. And if somebody does find it, it's going to be embarrassing for me.
Yes.
So as much as I don't feel like it, I need to clean up my own shit.
Yes.
And that is not like when I was living with a wife, and if you were throwing up, it's, oh, you sweet thing, let me clean that up for you. Why? All I'm going to do is guarantee you get sick too.
Yes.
So step back, let me clean up my own puke.
Okay.
And maybe that will be incentive to me at some point, not to be doing things that lead to puke, because that would be good. right?
Yeah.
It would be better if I wasn't sick all the time because I was not looking at, like I wasn't eating properly. And to me, that's the problem you get with grace. It's almost like an addiction where I'm going to go around making a mess and somebody's going to come behind me and look after that for me. And that is not a good that is not grace. That's not grace.
Okay.
That is, what are they, the Al-Anon.
It's using it. Okay. So it's,
Well, the Al-Anon have a wonderful way of talking about that. That's enabling.
yes.
And you don't need enablers in your life. And if what you think is grace,
Yes.
is an enabler,
Yes.
who is allowing you to be less of a person than you really
Yes.
could be or should be,
It's phony grace.
that's not. But there's a lot of enabling, and even in religion, there's a lot of enabling.
Okay.
In the sense that what I will do is I will declare you righteous and make you feel really good about what you're doing, even if it's not that good. And it's like we do with I consider it bad parenting when you tell little Johnny that he has done a beautiful job when it's not that great. We should all be a little more Simon Cowell. Like, yeah, you might want to think about whether that's the path for you to take.
Do you remember what you said about modern art in this city?
Well, yeah, it's I wouldn't put it on my fridge.
Okay.
As a kindness to one of my children.
Yes.
It has to be good. And we've talked about that in terms of quality, in terms of
yes.
And to me, grace is not for the faint of heart. It's not a thing to make, oh, you poor little thing, let me give you some grace.
Yes.
Like, grace is a robust thing. It is a thing it'll tear you to shreds.
Okay.
And I mean, the other place that I find that in my life now when living alone is, it's the positive side of living alone, is
yes.
that when I took a shower this morning, when I was done, I took a towel and I wiped down the shower, and I will have to clean out my shower in that way that people have to clean out their showers. Because I remember when I had kids and wife, and the shower was always left soaking wet, and then the next thing you know, you're taking off that scum, and it's taking you 15 tries with sandpaper
yes.
to get it off. But what I find is that if you just take the moment to wipe down that shower,
yeah.
and do that every time you have a shower and leave the shower dry, you never get that buildup of soap scum and hard water and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't happen. And yes, you have to clean your shower because there's sometimes a little mold by the whatever, but it's that, to me, is grace. The grace is that if you put in your effort, there is somewhere in the universe, God, from my point of view, who will let that work out better than it should have. Because there's no good reason why anything shouldn't fall apart. I mean, I'm trying to remember the African author. The book was called Things Fall Apart. They made us read that. And
what is it, When Things Fall Apart? That's by Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist monk.
No, this was an African person.
Okay.
And no, it's Bible college. They gave us this book, and essentially it was that sense that societies and organizations and everything has a tendency to it disintegrates. And a lot of what we do in life is spend a great deal of our time trying to help things not as fall apart as much as they want to.
Yes.
And to me, grace is the fact that instead of it simply falling apart, it falls apart into something else. Because everything does fall apart.
So is the advice to let it fall apart?
Well, yes and no. It's not like, oh, well, it's all going to work out. It's not. Jesus, take the wheel, because can I just say, I don't want you on my roads. Okay.
Right, because you're not the only person on the planet.
You're not, okay.
The world doesn't revolve around you.
No, well.
My mom used to love to say that.
Well, yeah, and she wasn't wrong, right? She was absolutely, and your job in the world is not to find a way to get the world to revolve around you, because your job in the world is to see what you can do to be of help wherever it is that you see to need to be today.
Yes.
And try to work that out in a way that you've taken thought, as my grandfather used to say, when's the best time to plant a tree? 25 years ago.
Yes.
Right. It's that kind of mentality about your life. So you should be a conservationist in the sense that you want to try and, you don't want things to simply fall. I mean, this building's, in the other room, they're working on fixing plaster, because I would prefer, if we're having, an event next in this room, the other room, or you've got an audience and people doing their thing, that the plaster doesn't fall on their heads.
Yes.
It would be much better if that didn't happen. And that takes a certain amount of effort. And will you ever get credit for that? Probably not. And that's a conversation I had with the movie people, because they had an hour of really good movie shooting here last Friday, and a lot of that was all this incredible work that 200 people did to let those folks have 3 hours or 3.5 hours, whatever it was, of peace, quiet. There was no alarms going off. That everything was put in order, so that those people could enter in and tell a story that was really difficult to tell.
Yes.
And be in the zone to tell that. And it was all these people, people catering, people looking after the parking lot, all that kind of stuff. And that's, that to me is grace. Like that's what grace is. You had all these people working together so that this person that really needed it, and I'll receive grace on Tuesday when I walk into an operating room. And as I said they said, "We'll pray for you, Reverend." When I left the hair shop, they said, "Oh, you're going, we'll pray for you." I said, "Don't pray for me. I'm going to be out like a light. Pray for the people who are in that room who have been gracious enough to be bothered to learn how to fix a hernia."
I have found this conversation to be much more of a roller coaster and an enigma to me than I thought it would be. But that's perfect. That's a perfect place to leave it. And at this point, and I thank you.
We'll stitch it up with that.
I'm supposed to be the funny one.
You are funny.
All right.
That's why
No, you're funnier today. Don't deny it. That's how it is. Now I'm going to give you, we're doing an abbreviated episode today.
Yes.
So many procedures to have. I'm going to give you a choice of subjects.
Okay.
Mennonite origin story part 2.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the Jews. My mother hates religion. Deschooling and industrialization.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Or pastoral care versus prenuptial agreements.
Pastoral care versus prenuptial agreements. That's an interesting topic.
Well, do you want to know why
we had told people to do their homework, right?
What?
Remember over Ivan Illich, we told people to do their homework. Shouldn't we talk about that? Last podcast.
Yes.
We talked about Ivan Illich and deschooling society. I think we can do that. And
okay.
How much time do we have? So,
I just forgot his name. That's all.
Yes, Ivan Illich. Yes, Ivan Illich wrote a book called Deschooling Society. And when I was a young minister trying to figure out, and I had taken Bible college courses, so you don't know the pastoral care stuff, right? You do pastoral care and how churches are organized and all that sort of thing. And then I went to do a philosophy degree. And during the philosophy degree, I was concentrating on things like business ethics, and because ethics was interesting to me from the point of view of living your life as a minister. Likely or not, some business person is going to come to you with a dilemma.
Right.
Right. And it was a wonderful course because it would tell you all kinds of things like, the Pinto gas tank could have been fixed for $1.50, and they decided it was cheaper to pay out the dead people than fix it for $1.50. And the person who did that was Lee Iacocca, made that decision.
Okay.
And then he ran Chrysler really, really well after that. So it's like, very interesting how you make ethical decisions in the context of marketplaces. But the other place that I took was called educational philosophy. And in that, we read around a lot of Waldorf schools, all of the different sorts of ways of organizing. But one of the most powerful books that I ever read was Deschooling Society by Ivan Illich. And he describes how in medieval times, most industrial stuff was done in family groups. The front of your house was your shop.
Cottage industry.
Well, yeah. And the back of your house was where you lived. And the front of the house was where you met the marketplace. And it could be female or male. It didn't matter. You would work together. There was no gender divides. There was no age divides. Everybody worked together if you were a tiny child. And I remember that on the farm when they put me on the tractor when I was 4 years old to steer, because I could steer, but that was all I could do. And I was at least useful. And there was that sense in which when you operate that way, and don't cohort people and don't put people aside. And
What
that's,
does it mean to cohort someone?
well, for example, the 9-year-olds are all going to be in a class together, or the 9 to 11-year-olds are going to be in a class together. And I mean, our school system is entirely cohorted. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and there might be a slight variation of age, but we grade everyone, and that's how we work through the school system, is you do that. And that is a very industrial thing because it produces at the end a peace worker.
Yes, and I want to mention two things.
Yeah.
First of all, for those of you watching or listening, there's construction going on. Just deal with it.
Yeah,
We'll get through it. The second thing is that's in stark contrast to what came before the Rockefeller era of education, which was the Little Red Schoolhouse.
Right. Well, the Little Red Schoolhouse was also a happy place in the sense that you did have one teacher sort of in charge, but the students were often teaching each other.
Which I only discovered recently, and it's so fascinating to me. And the way that I learned it was by listening to an interview with a bunch of like 5 or 6 parents in LA who decided to homeschool.
Right.
And in terms of methodology, because their kids were all different ages, they pulled their inspiration from that.
Right. Well, and in Bible college, for example, that when I really, we had to take Old Testament, or had to, it was a required course they took, and you took R.K. Harrison, which was a book, yay thick, and what was it, something like 25 or 2,700 pages. And this was all of the sort of the basic stuff you needed to know if you're going to read the Old Testament.
Yes.
And it was as dry as the desert sands, and as shifting. And I did my course and I read through all of that. And then I think I was in my 3rd year, and the Old Testament professor came and said, "Would you be my TA?" And I said, "Sure. And what are we going to do?" "Well, we have a lot of trouble with the R.K. Harrison textbook. And so could you tutor and get them up to go on our..." So all of a sudden I was teaching. And I first I would read through it and put a test together, and they'd all flunk, and then they would panic. And then I said, no, okay, this is why we did this, is to figure out how this all works. But here I was, a very young person, and I was reading R.K. Harrison again, like I read it when I was a student, and it was like, this is the dullest stuff in the world. And then I'm reading again in order to prepare other people to understand at least some portion of it. And now I'm taking that in a whole different way, because I now need to show you how to do this. I need to show you what's in here. Whereas before, all I was doing is to my book collection in my head, which is not good, right?
Book collections.
Yeah.
Book collections. Let's go back to the first book.
Yeah.
Deschooling and Industrialization.
Yeah.
For anyone who's interested in reading it, what is like the one message or theme or insight that you got from the book that made you fall in love with it and that made it so important to you?
It was simply this notion that get rid of the cohorts. And in church, you had Sunday school, and you had the UCW and the men's club, and you have, this grade class and that grade class, and they're all done basically the same as school. Then they just brought that, and it's a little bit like apartheid, right? Apartheid was taken from the Canadian residential native system and imposed on South Africa, the whole cloth. That didn't work out so well. It didn't work out well here. And the thing is to get rid of those cohorts. And what we've done here, for example, when we said we're going to have a movie night, well, the young people are going to do that. Yes, they are, but they can't do it on their own without your help. And your help might not be to do it, it's to let them do it, but also come and participate.
Yes.
And say, how come you don't have onions for my, hot dog or whatever? Like, make suggestions and help them get to the point where this is not just the thing, it's the thing the young people are doing, and it's so cute, and we're going to put it on the fridge. But actually an event that people would actually want to come to, and you actually want to come to, and they're doing it.
Yes.
So the younger people are doing that. And the interesting thing to me now is that they're working with people wanting to do high school hours, and the people that, were part of that process are now processing the new folks who are coming in saying, oh yeah, well, we'll do this now, right? And because these people are getting older doing their thing. And there's definitely distribution of labor, but you're way, way far ahead if you're like a family and everybody's participating. And there aren't, well, you can't do this because you're too young, or you can't do this because you're too old. And that's where as I age, that's where I will probably drive people crazy because they say, oh, well, Reverend, you're getting older. You shouldn't. And they'll mention something. And I'll say, why not? Like, if I physically can't do something, I suppose I will stop doing that, or mentally or whatever else it might be. But there is no magic number of 65 where your capacities are now gone. And even that is a cohort sort of thing. You're in the cohort of, and we do it also in society with the millennials.
Yes.
Right? Like there's this, and I've preached about that in church, that this business, that I find it quite a bit on the internet, where you have generations, throwing bombs at each other, like, oh, well, the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Zs, and how everybody's, sort of catcalling across those generations. That's foolishness.
I don't think so.
Well, I don't like it because it's like, yes, how, the Gen Zs have these advantages and the boomers have this advantage and the other people have this advantage. But, in the end, die, we all pass away, right? Like they're having a fight with people over the accident of their birth.
Yes. And
the advantages or disadvantages that the accident of their birth caused. I mean, we're in no position, because I can remember growing up with people who were in the First and Second World War.
Yes.
And that wasn't an advantage, I can assure you. And in some ways it was, because they came back with a resilience that most of us can't even begin to understand.
Okay.
Anyway,
have you ever heard of the Strauss-Howe generational theory of Anglophone history?
No, I've never heard of that.
So these two historians studied the march of history in the Anglophone world from the signing of the Magna Carta to the present day, which at that point I think was the 70s or 80s.
Right.
And they didn't just look at primary materials, but they also looked at the reporting in magazines and newspapers to get a feel for how people were describing personality type.
Right. Okay.
And what they found, much to their shock, because this wasn't the original intention of the research, what they found was, with two exceptions in those hundreds of years, that there were four archetypes, and each one persisted for 21 years, and making a 84-year epic.
Right.
EPO.
Okay.
Yeah.
Epoch, as we would call it.
And that they've repeated. Right. So this is a case in which Wikipedia really does an amazing job of deliciously and with real precision communicating. So if you want to know what the archetypes are, if you want to see the names, you can just go to that. I'm not going to describe it, but I will say that something ugly happened with this research, and it was co-opted by marketers.
Oh boy.
Who really didn't understand, they latched on to the words baby boomer,
oh dear,
Generation X, millennial. The millennial came from Strauss and Howe. At this point, it was and here's the thing, and the reason why I don't hate these is because the personality type for millennial was actually prophesied by the two at least 20 years in advance. Okay. And then after that, I forget the generation after that. So I think one of their intentions in disseminating their work was to have people not be surprised or angered or in desperate need to reject their parents' generation. Yeah. In other words, to understand that they have those attitudes because they worked for that time, and their parents. And you know, if you read the work in its scholarly form, it's actually an exhortation to not whine about your parents.
Yes, yeah, I'm a great believer. Don't do that.
But that's not. But every
generation does.
yeah, but and the marketing version of it, it actually went in the opposite direction because it came against who had more money,
Right.
who had more spending power. It's become like a war of resentment.
Yes, that's the part of it that I find not helpful, and I do think that it is necessary in some, what is it? I think Jordan Peterson, talks about Geppetto and all of, and the rescuing of the father and the,
which is
all
based on a really, really old Italian mythology, not Greco.
No, it's more ancient than that. Yeah. But it seems to me it's necessary. I mean, I had my own days of the shun and the whole 9 yards, and being very upset with what parents' expectations of me were, and my inability to meet those expectations, and the consequences of that for my life, which were at the time I thought very negative, but now as I sit here now, I realize that this was the trajectory I had to go on. The thing that I think we need, and again, it's a little bit when I talk about second naivety, I think that is something that one needs to find with one's parents and grandparents, is you need to find that second naivety where you realize they're assholes, but you get past that and understand that that you have one too.
Yeah.
Like that we're all assholes. And this is how life unfolds. And you get to the point where you can honor and you may not understand them, but you can at least honor them for the work they did.
Yes.
On which you now stand.
Yes.
And at least be grateful for that.
Yes.
Rather than simply be resentful that, they got a cheaper house than you did, or,
yes,
or they had more money, or
maybe they didn't get the internet. Maybe they didn't get Uber.
Well, whatever it is, resenting each other, and I would say this even as in terms of pastoral care in a congregation. A lot of what you need to help people do is not resent each other. And there is that wonderful commandment that says, "Thou shalt not covet." Speaking of Jewish, "Thou shalt not covet," and that seems like one of the least interesting commandments. But to me, it's one of the most interesting.
Why did you mention Judaism?
Well, because Judaism at least put 10 of them together and said, "Okay, boys, here, boys and girls, here's the 10." And what were they? A great big conglomeration of people who managed to find their way out of Egypt and then into a, promised land. And anybody who's ever been to a promised land knows that it's a zoo. And you're going to get mad at each other, and you're going nobody can live with other people.
What have you been promised?
And be social.
What have you been promised becomes the question.
Yes, well, and
when you're the chosen people,
well, yeah,
or it's the promised land, it's very easy to assume that that's a bright, happy, positive phenomenon. Right. But maybe it's
whatever the problem is, whatever the problem is,
yes,
resenting the other person, all that does is cut you off from the resources of that person.
Yeah.
That they will, given a different circumstance, and at least the marketers, as evil as they are, understand how you...
I would say shallow.
Well, but they at least understand the importance of this marketing project of ours doesn't work if what we do is cut each other off from resources.
Yes.
And I hear that so often in church life and in life, like, okay, I'm taking my ball and bat and I'm going home.
Yes.
Right? Like, I'm not playing with you anymore because I don't like what you did to me, or I'm mad about it, or I resent that you have a nicer mitt than I have. So I'm taking my ball and bat and going home. And that strategy always messes up the possibility of grace to fly back to that. That always gets in the way of what is possible in the world. When we say, the first time you lob a bomb, like there's bombs now in Pakistan and India, when you lob a bomb, you've just set everything back decades.
Okay. That's brilliant.
Right.
I'm going to shout out to a previous episode. Or is that called a callback? I don't know. I don't really use a lot of slang. I don't really use a lot of slang. Yeah. It's not my brand. I remember we were talking about affirmation.
Yes.
It seems to me that affirmation is the setup for resentment.
Yes. Because if you don't affirm me, then I resent that.
Yeah. So
And
it's
if
better
I
not
need-
to care whether
well,
or
and if
not.
I need your affirmation so badly,
Yes.
and you just neglect that,
Yes.
right? And that's what the in pastoral care there, and I would have to go looking in my library for that book too. But they used to send us there is a description. There's a description of the different sorts of people you're going to meet in the in a congregational
Yes.
setting, and the one description of one type of person that they call it, and it's not very positive, is called a black hole.
Okay.
And the notion with a black hole is you can pour everything into a black hole and it will absorb it. And there is no satiation. There never can be, because it is a black hole, right? You could put all the universe into a black hole and it would absorb that and give nothing in return.
Okay.
And there are folks for whom that's their thing, is they are a black hole where they are horrifically needy and will always demand more than they get and be resentful of everything they do get because it isn't enough. And they have no capacity to use what they receive to give back anything. Right. And that's grace. Is part of grace is I realize that I've received more than I deserve. That makes me responsible to do something with what I've received.
Yeah.
To be gracious to others, or to create the possibility of grace for others, whether it's, I donated this, or I helped with that, or there's a million ways that we can actually contribute to the lives of other people. That is not, it's not this thing where it's and that's been the most amazing thing to me in life, is that oftentimes it is the tiniest thing that you can do.
Yes.
That makes such a huge difference for someone else, and it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. And to me, that's kind of magic. That's the kind of magic
Yes.
that I think is real magic, is when I can give something that, well, what was it? King David said, "I will not give the Lord something that cost me nothing," when it came to the threshing floor, right? It was like, Nahum said, "Well, King, if you want to make a temple here, hey, I'll give it to you." And he says, "No, I'm going to pay you for this, because I can't give the Lord a gift that costs me nothing." But I actually think there is something to be. It's not that it costs you nothing, but it costs you so little in proportion to what grace is on the other side of it.
Yes.
That it becomes this amazing superpower. And as a clergy person, that's the only real superpower a clergy person possesses, is that capacity. And you're never going to be perfect at it, and you go to bed at night thinking, I could have done that, or I could have done something else. But it's a wonderful thing to think that what little bit I have to contribute can often make way more impact than what I imagined, what is really possible. Like, it shouldn't be that way. Like, it shouldn't
Yes.
make that much difference.
Now, time's almost up.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you a quick rapid fire question. Give me a 5-minute answer, and I hope you have fun with it.
Mm.
So, my mother rejected Catholicism at 25 years old.
Okay.
Up until
it's a good age for that sort of thing.
Up until 3 or 4 days ago, and she grew up in Malta.
Yep.
Her mother tossed her into convents a couple of times because her life was very hectic.
Right, and the nuns straightened out.
The nuns were terribly abusive,
mm-hmm.
And I think that at 25, I don't know if there's anything else. It's a very sensitive subject for her.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at 25, she had, perhaps it was, let's just say that she'd had enough
mm-hmm.
of a lot. And that was like one of her first triumphs in self-determination.
Right.
And my observation is that there have been profoundly negative consequences. And I'm not saying for everyone, but for her, there are things that she wants in her life
mm-hmm.
that I don't think she knows in North America can come from a church or a synagogue or
right.
or anywhere. So she's talking to me earlier this week about her loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
looking for a man.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And she wanted me to coach her on online dating.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
now,
that's
as someone who's not been on Grindr for a year and a half at this point, I first of all knew that if I gave her any instruction in going online, that it would be a nuclear explosion of messiness for her and whoever she
Right.
reached out to.
Right.
So in thinking about, potential, no, that's not actually what actually happened was she said, well, where am I supposed to meet someone in person? And it wasn't strategic. It was just, so I said, well, go to church and or maybe a synagogue, because like what you've what your ideal man that you've described is like a very
Sounds
New Jersey Jewish stereotype. And so she said, wait a minute. She said, people meet people at church. I said, yes. And she said, well, why is that a good place? I said, well, if you go to church on a regular basis, or if you go to synagogue on a regular basis, there's no guarantee that you're a great person.
No.
But it says a little something about rigor, community, discipline, etc. So she said, when you come here, can you take me to a church and a synagogue? So here's the question for you.
Right.
5 minutes.
Yes.
Is that a bad reason to go to church?
No.
All right, talk it up.
Here's the thing. It is probably a bad reason to go. And I've had folks that were very disappointed. And I had one person leave the church and be very upset because they hadn't found a girlfriend.
Okay.
And that had been why they came. And, I felt badly for this person because it made them very, very angry and resentful.
Yes.
But I also understand that in terms of social places where you can go, there are no dances anymore as such.
Yes.
Right? And that used to, I don't know how many people that I've married or done anniversaries with that they have said, oh yes, we met at the dance hall.
Yes.
That sort of thing. And there were those kinds of institutions. And some people meet at bars, but bars are interesting places to meet people because often that is a rather short-term, you know what I'm saying? In terms of long-term, short-term, churches are far more into long-term relationships than short-term. And yet they have this interesting familial sort of thing where if you're part of the family and you wander off, that's okay, and you're always welcome to return, sort of thing. Like especially here, it's like, yep, you get mad, you go, like, or your life changes. I mean, we have one young man who is gone to Switzerland, and he's as welcome back here when he returns. He's in Switzerland studying culinary skills and all that. And when he comes back here, it's like he's never left. And I think that's a wonderful kind of community to be part of where, you actually get to go live your life and do the things that are unfolding for you, but then also come here and we know who you are and we catch up and we're back.
Yeah.
Right? Everything. So there's nothing wrong with that. I think the thing that happens to people is when they do come to church, they find it different than they were expecting because church has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And I think when I'm thinking about your mother, for example, at 25, she said no to the Catholic Church. And in a lot of ways, people grow up in a faith tradition. I did in the Mennonite. And around the age of 25 or 20, or just depends on a little bit on sometimes later than that, it's a kind of a parent that you rebel against. And you say, this was really, I don't like this, and I'm going my own way, and I'm going to assert my independence. And often the problem is, and it happens with parents too, that you just don't, like, you're having a relationship with your mother, and I congratulate you for that, because that is a wonderful, good thing. And I'm sure at some point you had to differentiate yourself.
Oh, my mother and I hated each other for most of our lives. Right. And I've only really gotten along with her. Right. I'm 52 years old.
Right.
I've only gotten along with her for the past 6 to 9 months.
Yes, but keep that going because it's a great grace for her and for you.
Yes.
And sometimes that's what goes on with church, is you get to be really angry with it for a long time. And then as you grow older and as you see the world differently, you don't really want to be so independent and so lonely. And it might not be that you return to the church you came from. And that's certainly my case, as I didn't go back to the Mennonites. But I did go forward
Yes.
to something else.
Can we make that our teaser for next episode?
Huh.
So in next week's episode, Mennonite Origin Story Part 2.
Right.
Let's talk about the Jews and pastoral care versus prenuptial agreements. And I'll tell you why.
Yes. I'm very intrigued.
Why I'm interested in making that a subject. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow.